I'm the only one on both.
All right. Welcome. Good afternoon, Mr. Fletcher. We are now convening a joint meeting of the PHED and E&C committees. Councilmember Rice is taking care of something important that on his family side. He has some good stuff he's working on. I'll just say that. With that, Jean has prepared a pretty thorough packet that, sorry, I'm trying to find my appropriate piece of paper here, that walks through a lot of different issues related to Workforce Montgomery and the workforce development system and delivery structure. I think we can ask Jean to walk through the packet in a few minutes, but maybe I'll also ask you, Jerome, if you want to just give us an update on your work, just to help with the context of, you know, our conversation today, recent activity. But you know, I think our objective here is to really shine a light on, especially Workforce Montgomery and what we want to see going forward. It has been a bit of a roller coaster, I suppose, this year. There's some recent developments, right? The executive director has recently announced her departure, and I believe the board chair, after serving an extended term, is also not going to be he's went beyond the call of duty and served more terms than necessarily intended. So we'll have a fresh leadership structure at WorkSource, and it's a great time to kind of, you know, reestablish the vision or the council's intent and the partnership with the executive branch to make that happen. Why don't I just kick it to Jean, if you think we ought to just go back to Jerome for an update, or do you think you need to?
I'll just highlight a few quick items for the committees. So the reason we're having the discussion today is during the expedited bill 1919, there was some discussion about the delivery structure, et cetera. At the time, the bill was just a clean bill. It was providing more options to the council in its designation process, and so this meeting was scheduled later to have a more in-depth dive. And as staff notes, a lot of it's with executive and council right now, because as we get ready to get into fiscal 21, it's just good to take time to signal and kind of make sure we're all on the same page, given the
signaling, yes,
the breadth of conversation the council has had this year regarding workforce development. Because we're running behind a little bit, I'll be really brief, or as brief as possible. So council staff lays out three things I think the committee should talk about today with the executive. And one of those items is related to the Workforce Development Board. This is a state-mandated board to implement the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act federal funding. Regardless of the county-designated workforce development organization implementing that board will still need to exist. That board will still need to implement WIOA funding, and so I think it's really important for the committees to understand where we're at in that process. All 34 board members are expired, and so the executive has a lot of latitude to be able to reappoint or appoint new members, some of which the Chair Reamer has already mentioned. The second item is the council has a lot of latitude in its designation process. We also talked about that during expedited bill 1919. You can designate a nonprofit organization, a public education institution, or both to implement the county's policies. And even within that, that somewhat guides where the executive's WIOA board would implement WIOA funding. And therefore, I think, again, it's important for the council, the committees at least, to begin signaling with the executive kind of where we're headed with this. Staff does spend some time looking at the workforce development policies, and depending if the committees have questions, we can discuss that some more. Staff does highlight 4 kind of strategic groupings that we haven't seen before as just an opportunity to put buckets, not to create silos, but to put buckets in terms of conversation of how to implement the policies.
Buckets, very small silos, or no? Okay.
Strategic groupings was the wording chose by council staff based on the service delivery as well as expectations, because I think, again, it's important for us to have a conversation about our expectations as we get ready to go into the fiscal 21 budget, regardless of, again, of the designation process, so that we all are on the same page of what do we expect the workforce development organization to do to implement the council's priorities and policies. And then finally, council staff does note a few items as we do look forward, given where WorkSource is at. Chair Reaver's already noted they're in a CEO search process, and staff has just noted the Workforce Development Board has opportunities for reappointments or new appointments, and there's opportunities abundant to kind of see a leadership shift, as well as opportunities to kind of double down on our expectations. And staff would be remiss, given that Chair Rice is not here, that we're also still working with the executive branch through the Departments of Correction and WorkSource to implement the job center that is at the Correction Institute in Clarksburg. So that's noted in the packet as a definite expectation, but those expectations are not detailed. They're high level right now, and as the committee signal the expectations that are most important, we will work to make sure performance and reporting is built into the next budget.
Yeah, let's make sure let's put a pin in the jail conversation, and we can come back to that before we break today. Just get an update. It's an important one. Good. Before we go to Mr. Fletcher, Council President.
Thank you so much. So first, really, thank you, Mr. Smith, for your very careful support and also the recommendations and kind of shepherding this process. It's been a little while in the making. I also want to acknowledge that Councilmember Jawando has also been involved in a lot of the conversations, and you, Mr. Fletcher, as well. I want to thank you for everybody working together with the Joint Committee as well to get us to this point. I think I'm going to probably walk around with this economic development platform in my purse from now on to remind us all that workforce, yeah, I'll laminate one so it doesn't get worn out, but the workforce development piece is really important. It's really front and center. And we did adopt this platform today, so this is a really appropriate conversation. And I appreciate the fact that I think we have a really good roadmap. I believe that the way that these particular 4 elements were, identified or articulated, I think provides us with a really good opportunity to continue with WorkSource Montgomery under new leadership with the executive director and new leadership at the board, et cetera, focusing on some of the pieces that were mentioned here, the barrier supported intensive services, as well as entry point types of activities like the job centers, et cetera. And then it identifies in terms of industry engagement, talks about, for example, our Economic Development Corporation is being able to play a pivotal role there. And then in terms of relevant curricula and training programs, education institutions, which is, of course, great because we did pass the bill that allowed us to also make that, take that into consideration. So I feel like we have a very nice roadmap that if we're able to then identify what are going to be the deliverables, what are going to be the outcomes, what are going to be those particular targets that we want to impose, I think this could allow us to get there. I'm very excited because for a while it wasn't clear to me where we may end up, but I think this is a pretty good framework for us to move forward. And I want to acknowledge also that Dr. Pollard is in the audience, and she's also been, of course, very involved as being not only on the board of WorkSource Montgomery, but also kind of thinking through some of the particular areas that we may want to address. The other thing that I find important regarding this possible path forward is that I think it really does support many of these types of frameworks like the Economic Development Platform, like many of the other things that we want to do. I believe that sometimes we have to take a step back and just reassess. That is this moment. So instead of what some people even suggested, that maybe we just needed to start from scratch, I don't think we need to do that. I think that we just need to take that step back and then signal some particular direction. So anyway, I just wanted to share that, that I think that this is has the basis for a pretty good framework for us to move forward.
Thank you so much. I had a little bit of tunnel vision here, but I see we have our WorkSource Montgomery crew is here. Thank you so much, and our Chamber of Commerce, our Economic Development Corporation, our Department of Corrections, Montgomery College. We even have the Bethesda Beat here, so the gang's all here. If I missed anyone, please let me know. So a little background, a little context and update, Jerome, on your work, please.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Madam President, and other council members. So we began this discussion about workforce development probably in late spring, early summer. We had some good meetings regarding how we wanted to move forward with workforce development in the county. And I think the one thing that was clear to everyone was that it was important that we reach every demographic that we desired to within the county. And maybe some of that wasn't happening the way that we had envisioned. The expanded priorities were given to Workforce Montgomery regarding making sure that they address the most vulnerable in the county, as well as being the convener of the workforce ecosystem in the county. And they embraced it, and they have made progress, I would say, on both ends of that. One, the convening happened. I think most of us, if not all of us, attended that, and we heard some very good conversation, very good points being made, and it was a great beginning. Definitely not the last one, but a beginning of getting all the stakeholders together, and I think that that's going to be powerful in the county. And also, myself and Dr. Giles have had conversations regarding how do we come up with a strategic plan to address the most vulnerable. And we believe that as we explore how TANF is used and the best practices that it is used in other counties, that it will allow us to address that demographic in a way that hasn't been done yet in Montgomery County. So we do think there's opportunity there. As far as the executive office is concerned, we have to take ownership for what we have not delivered on successfully, and the board is one of them. And one of the things that we've struggled with is that the reason why that when you create an organization like this, that they staggered the terms so that you wouldn't have to run into a situation where you had so many to reappoint at one time. And the way that we came in and approached it was that we thought that we should reappoint just about the entire board. There's a board composition that Mr. Smith said of 34, but there's 23 of a minimum that have to be appointed in order to meet the criteria that makes up that board based on, I think, state law. And we have been deliberate in trying to establish those relationships with those people, those business owners, those stakeholders and leaders in the community that we felt were the ones that we want to appoint to the board. So now we're at a point where we have about 10 or 11 that we have identified that we want to send to council, and that is part of the process of the county executive office. So there has been what I would say a lot of effort, but not a lot of results that you can actually put your hands on.
Are you seeking all new members, or I would imagine you have the ability to reappoint existing members such as you?
There will be some reappointments. Not every member will turn over, but there is what I would say a good evaluation and conversation that needs to be had with those members to make sure that everyone's on the same path and page as to what the expectation is going forward. What we don't want is a board, and not saying that we have that right now, but what we don't want is a board that is not thoroughly engaged. We are, when you talk about a convening effort for this county, you're talking about leveraging and brokering relationships that are in existence to benefit the county and the residents of the county. And so those require some conversations, and it's just more than just picking a person and saying, okay, you can stay or you can go. It really is a little bit more deeper than that.
How does that mesh with the hiring process? Is that a different board that makes the decision over the CEO, or is it the same?
The hiring process is being managed by the executive committee of Workforce Montgomery. And on that executive committee, there are members who will be continuing on. One mainly is the vice president, Gordon. I forget his last name, I apologize. But Gordon is involved in the process, and he's the continuity that will be putting his hands on making sure that the person that is picked. I am also on that executive committee, making sure that the county executive office is represented. To make sure that the person that is picked, understands not only what they're getting into, but has the values to execute what we want done.
Thank you. I'm not following you. So how many do you? Now I'm a little more confused. The board, you're in the process of finding new board members. There is a search committee. The current board still exists. It is, or does it? Okay, Gene.
I was going to say the many member that was appointed by Executive Leggett may continue in that condition until a new board member is until that person is either reappointed or a new board member is appointed for replacement. However, it's important to know that the Workforce Montgomery went through a bit of a transition in 2018 to integrate both the Workforce Development Board and its private board. Council staff thinks rather than getting into those weeds, it's important to understand that there's still a state-mandated board that exists that has almost 50% share of the voting rights, so to speak, of Workforce Montgomery's operations as well as a CEO search, but there's still a private board that runs the nonprofit organization. So we shouldn't assume that all the Workforce Development Board members wholly control the Workforce Montgomery organization.
Right. And that board is continuing as they would normally until we, the county, give them different direction, and we have not done that yet.
Okay, so you're continuing with the current board or
Correct.
selection of them in the hiring committee?
Correct.
And how many, can you tell us who's on that committee? How many members?
There are 5 members on the committee. It's myself. Aaron Allen is the leader of the committee.
Okay. Maybe you can follow up with Gene
yes.
afterwards and let us know. So there's a selection committee that is a subcommittee of the board.
Yes.
And that will be, are you already interviewing? The job has been posted already.
The job has been posted.
Yeah.
It's been closed. We've had a round of telephone interviews. We've narrowed that group of candidates down to a round that we're bringing in for in-person interviews that will happen on December the 3rd.
December the 3rd, you'll have in-person interviews with all 5 of the 6 of the subcommittee, the selection committee,
Yes.
nomination committee.
Correct. And then they will interview those those people in person. We will narrow that down to 2 or 3, and then those 2 or 3 people will be put in front of the chair and the executive, the full executive committee, not the hiring committee, but the executive committee for further decision making.
Okay, let's pause here. Yes.
Thank you. Just on that point, good to see you, Mr. Fletcher. I had suggested to you and to the executive and to the executive committee and anyone who would listen that I think that it would make sense in light of where we are now that those final candidates, similar to what the Economic Development Corporation did with their final candidates,
Yes.
that they would come and speak with the Economic Development Committee or the Joint Committee at whoever is available to do so. Is that something that is going to happen?
That's not my decision to make. What I have recommended is that prior to the final candidate being brought on board, that it would be wise for them to make their presence to you and your colleagues.
Okay. I would agree, and I hear my colleagues saying, I think that's helpful. I mean, we're all trying to swim in the same direction on the same page and the same choir sheet, however you want to say it. And that was helpful in the context of EDC. And so I would just urge everyone interested in listening to do that.
I think it's a good step in the right direction for something that we all want to succeed. So the more transparent and inclusive we can be, the better it should go.
Great. So I had another question. I don't know if you were done. You were still rolling.
I'm going to a topic we haven't raised yet, because if you do, we can wait till we get to it.
Let's pause. Let's pause. Yeah, sure.
I have some broad questions about the packet, which I can wait on. I have a question then specific to this. I'll just ask that. Okay, got it. I'm just trying to. I'm trying to figure out where we're going in this conversation, and frankly, I'm trying to figure out where we're going in workforce development. So I appreciate everybody bearing with me as I try to follow the bouncing ball here. But I'm still a little bit unclear, I guess, about the dynamics of there's 34 board seats in total. All 34 of those terms have expired. Is that correct?
Correct. But the Workforce Montgomery they communicated with the county prior to the current administration arriving, and they informed them what they were doing. There was nothing that we can find that says anything from the county told them to stop doing what you're doing. So they went ahead, and then a year later, almost, we came back and said, hey, why did you do that? So now we have to go through the process of making sure that the board members that we appoint are confirmed through this council. So the ones that have terms that ended, that we want to stay, need to be reappointed. If they're not going to be reappointed, then we need to tell them, thank you for their service, and we need to replace them with a different member. That's the process we're going through.
And do we have a timeline on when that process would be over?
We're halfway through it now. We have about 10 or 11 people identified that I was told we're ready to send over to get confirmed. That will be about half of what we want to replace, and then we'll have the other half shortly.
So the plan is to replace 20 to 22 of the 34?
The plan is
and
to
then you have 10 or 11 identified so far. I'm just trying to
Well,
understand.
the plan is to reappoint at least 23. That's the minimum that you have to have. 34 is the number that was on the board prior.
Plan is to appoint, not to reappoint.
Well, I think.
Some cases.
Right. I think some need to be reappointed and some need to be
Right.
appointed. So, because like I said, we're not.
If
All
I
the
took you
members-
literally, I think you just said the plan is to reappoint 23 members. That would mean that the same people. I think you meant to just say,
Appoint
your plan is
or
to have a
reappoint.
board member,
Yes.
a board of 23 people at least.
Correct.
Yeah.
Whether through appointment or reappointment.
I'm not sure I'm clear. This is not a gotcha question. This is literally,
So
if the whole purpose of this conversation is for us to get on the same page, I'm not sure we've yet
right.
gotten to that point of everybody understanding what the process is going to look like, how this is going to work.
Okay.
Unless I'm mistaken, there are 34 existing members on the board. Those terms have expired. There's an option to reappoint each of those 34 members individually or to thank them for their service.
Correct.
And there's a mutual conversation that is going to have to take place. 10 or 11 of the 34 you've identified those spots. Are those 10 or 11 or any of them existing board members, or those are all new board members of
Yes.
the county exec?
Some of them are existing.
Okay, so of the 34 spots, you have 10 or 11 identified, some of which are existing board members who will be renewed and some of which are new members?
True.
Okay, so then there's an additional 23 or 24, depending on if we're 10 or 11, 23 or 24 decisions that the administration will be making in the coming weeks, and that's the process that you're halfway through?
Yes, but the 34, I believe, is the number of the maximum that can be on the board.
You only need 23.
You only
minimum
have to have
state.
23. So there could
You
be.
might start at 23
Yep.
and then slowly build up
Yes, sir.
to 34?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And based on timing, with the CEO search, do you expect that the 23, I don't want to say permanent, but the 23
New.
board members who you are going to be expecting to continue on in the near future, do you expect those folks to be on board and to make a decision on the new CEO before the new CEO
No.
is hired?
No.
Okay. All right. I'll yield. I'll wait to hear a little bit more until I get thoroughly confused with where we're headed, and I'll ask more questions. Thank you.
And following off Mr. Friedson's point, you said no. So who will be making the decision on, will the full current board be voting on the
From my,
CEO?
From my understanding, and again, I am not a full board member there with
You're a
them.
non-voting member.
Correct.
Yeah.
So from my understanding, the current executive committee is going to review and evaluate the potential employees that the search committee puts in front of them. It is that executive committee, to my knowledge, that I think will be making that decision. Now, I believe and I hope that there have been conversations that will get elevated to the executive committee to make it a truly board-inclusive selection so that not only the executive committee has a chance to see the selected candidate, but the entire board has time as well to review the selected candidate. But
you
I
don't-
cannot say
you-
that
you
for
don't
sure because
Is anyone from the executive committee from Worksession Montgomery here? Could I just get an answer? Could one of you come down? Could I just get just that's just one question. I just want to get an answer. And Jerome's guessing he's not a
right,
member.
just one question, yeah, because I'm not 100%
You know.
sure. Oh yes, hey, they're here. Yeah. Come on. Hello.
I mean, this is just a critical point because we passed the expedited bill, and I just need to know, and there's no right or wrong answer. Well, there might be, but I just I just think we need to be clear on what your intentions are right now, where you're at the process. If you could just introduce yourself, and thank you.
Yep. So I'm Leslie Weber. I'm the secretary of the Worksource Montgomery Board. I don't have my bylaws with me, but I believe our process is for any significant decision like this, the executive committee or any committee of the board makes a recommendation in the form of a motion. And so that's what would happen. There'd be a recommendation on the recommended candidate, and that goes to a full board for vote.
That's your understanding, Mr. Rose?
Yes, that is correct.
And then I'll just reiterate, I think, what I said a few moments ago. It would be, I think there's desire on this side of the dais to, once you get to your finalists, to have those folks socialized with the members of the joint committee.
Yep, we've heard that, and there's been some discussion about it, but until we get to the point where we have those finalists, I think it's premature to figure out what that schedule looks like.
Wonderful. Thank you. I'm clear on that particular point.
Andrew?
Yeah, just a quick follow-up on the board situation and appointing the new board members. So what's the process of that? How is that being advertised? How are we making those selections? Is that internally identifying people who you know? Has that been advertised, and is that a public process? How's that process working?
I believe it is a public process, but I believe the majority of the work is being done internally by county executive staff who are reaching out and identifying potential members.
Okay, I'd love, if not here, I know you probably don't have that with you, but if we could get some information on I don't even know specific candidates, people who are being considered, but what's the process in terms of, what type of public outreach, who we've reached out to, how we've reached out, how do we know that we're, reaching the broad folks that you would expect for, a county board that is representing county government and spending a lot of county taxpayer money. The only other clarification, because I heard you are the 10 or 11 candidates that you're going to start with. The county executive is going to make a determination on those, and then you're going to provide input to the board on the new members of the board. Did I catch that?
No, I
correctly?
Think once that happens, once we identify those 10 or 11, we actually, well, yes, we do have to identify and let the board know if they are current members, if they will be extended, or if they will be replaced, and then those names come to you for appointment. I think once they're appointed by you, then that's how the transition of the members comes to the new board.
Okay, I thought I heard that you were saying that the board would be notified and given the opportunity to weigh in on the new board members.
No.
Okay, just on the CEO. Okay, that seemed irregular to me, so I just wanted to clarify that. Thank you.
Okay. I think we have gotten in the mud pretty quick with this conversation. I think we need to step back here, and council members are going to have a lot of more macro issues. But I think that you, the executive branch, and WorkSource Montgomery needs to hear from the county council that we want you to continue, and in what fashion.
True.
Thank you. I think that's really the conversation that we needed to have today.
Sure.
Was that WorkSource Montgomery is going to continue to be the entity that provides services, and in what manner. And then that will hopefully give some confidence to the process of hiring an executive, a CEO, and appointing board members. And
Very true.
Personally, I feel that it's not helpful to try to achieve those goals while the very foundation of the organization is seemingly in shifting sands. So I'd like to try to set that a little bit, and I think that if we can have a dialogue on that core question. And I want to just say again, Councilmember Rice is concerned, and as we all are, that we pin down this issue about the corrections program and the jobs, but we don't need to start with that. I think I just want to keep making sure that so others will bring it up. So let's talk about more fundamental issues. Thank you.
Okay, so I will repeat what I said in my first comments. Going back to this particular question, I think that Mr. Smith has laid out a very thoughtful blueprint, considering a lot of the challenges that exist vis-a-vis folks who had said, well, maybe we just need to kind of like start from scratch. Well, we have a lot of contracts that still have to be executed. We understand that, the organization is going through a transition in terms of leadership and also board. Therefore, it makes sense to at least retain, given those kinds of challenges of executing continuing to provide the services, et cetera. I think that what Mr. Smith has laid out is that, we could agree in terms of giving direction to Mr. Fletcher and everybody else that the organization should continue, knowing that there's going to be new administration, a new director, as well as new board members, to execute those sort of WIOA type of, I think that's the way you pronounce it, types of functions, WIOA, types of functions that are very basic. At the same time, we can then begin the transition with a partnership with an educational institution, because now we have that flexibility because of the bill, and then also see how we integrate our partnership with the Economic Development Corporation in terms of this whole issue of industry engagement. And I guess we could also maybe put in a check-in point, if a year's time, we can allow ourselves the flexibility to come back and see how that arrangement is working, whether we need to strengthen something or shift something. But I know that it's not that this is the first conversation regarding this very complicated issue. And that's why, again, I just commend Mr. Smith, and maybe Mr. Smith, you would like to speak a little bit about how it is that you came up with this particular way forward. But I think that this at least provides us with continuity, with the ability to give the organization under new leadership, an opportunity to proceed with us identifying goals, et cetera, but then also beginning to look at innovative ways to address other issues that perhaps it was just way too much for the organization to take on at the same time. So if you indulge me, Mr. Chair, can we have Mr. Smith elaborate a little bit about whether I've articulated that appropriately? It was something I missed, but it seems to me that that would be an interesting compromise.
Certainly, and I wanted to note, especially because you mentioned a check-in, I mean, the council resolution that designates WorkSource Montgomery as our workforce development organization will expire June of 2021. Okay. So there's clearly a check-in that has to occur there, and therefore, given the change in leadership and the laying out of expectations, there's a clear time for this council. It will still be the same council members, same committees, to say we're going to check in and say this is what the expectations were and what has changed, what has not, and then obviously the council will have the opportunity to take another shot at what they want to do with that. So I wanted to just clearly articulate that check-in point already exists to some degree.
Can you talk a little bit about your proposal here, or the guidelines, the broad?
Certainly. The attempt was to just to frame the conversation. I think listening to council members in this year, there's a lot of different priorities when it comes to workforce development, and you, Council President, have mentioned the continuum, and the attempt was to try to give, again, strategic groups to understand that continuum, not only vis-a-vis how do we hope to invest and continue that in the many service partners that we have, and as the council members have noted, we have already some in the room, and there are hundreds of nonprofits that are not in the room that are providing workforce development services in this county and doing great work. But also be able to link that to the workforce development organizations in terms of expectations. And so it's not a perfect system. It was just meant to design a place to really pinpoint and have hinge points as we go through this conversation. So if we want to be able to do more barrier support and intensive services, especially for our unemployed and those that have barriers to employment, which I know many council members have mentioned as a challenge that we want to overcome, the Workforce Development Organization has a different expectation there than they say would if they're trying to do something related to a tech talent pipeline. And so trying to create these hinge points, these strategic groups, so that as council members and those that are on the committees or those that are not on the committees can say, we expect the Workforce Development organizations to do X, Y, or Z, and then in that we can work with the executive staff to lay out performance measurements and expectations in our contract, because all of the money that goes to the Workforce Development Organization goes through a contract that we can spell out what we expect to come back. So and then so that was one, and I'll just quickly go through the job centers. Is simply we need more entry points. WorkSource Montgomery has created hire centers. I think that's a great idea. It gets more entry points into the county. It's not the traditional job center, but the more critical point there is that we need to make sure that that's happening in a way that we're linking as many services as possible that need to be there, not just jobs. And Mr. Fletcher's already mentioned some of the TANF connections that could occur, or temporary assistance for needy families, for those who don't know what that acronym is. And then, as you've mentioned, the engagement, I believe, can happen on multiple levels. As you've mentioned, the EDC is already doing that. WorkSource Montgomery was doing that. Whether there's overlap there, I think is important for us as a council to understand and talk about, or for the communities to talk about to make sure there's not overlap, but we need to be hearing from the business community, as was noted during this privatization process, that more business input was needed to make sure that the training and kind of stepping stones to employment that need to occur were occurring so that we had workforce for the needs of the businesses in the community. And then finally, obviously, we have great education institutions. I know the committees or the Education and Culture Committee had an update about the University of Shady Grove yesterday. We have Montgomery College, we have MCPS, Johns Hopkins, among others in the county, and making sure that those are not only connected to the system, and I think how the council wants to handle that, I think, is a little more amorphous, because sometimes it could just be simply an offshoot program, but I think it's important for the workforce development organization to signal not only to the education institutions what business needs are, but also to the council where those connections need to occur. So that's some of the thought process. Again, it was meant to give high-level expectations so that as we develop something with the executive staff, the council has a clear pinch point in terms of what they were expecting and it's laid out. And so that when we get to that checkpoint and close to 2021, hopefully probably before that, we can say, did we get there or did we not?
Right, but I guess my point to you is that because this is not the first conversation, so what I'm looking for is whether with this high-level guidance that you included here, do we have, as I articulated, a possible way forward that says we're not going to completely dismantle WorkSource Montgomery. We're not going to do that, as it had been suggested, that maybe we just kind of start from scratch. So if I'm reading your guidelines appropriately, correct me if I'm wrong, basically what you're kind of suggesting is that we don't do that, that we instead focus WorkSource Montgomery under new leadership on some of these basic pieces that we know they can do well, look towards institution of higher learning or educational institution for some other kinds of support and other activities, et cetera, and then seek those partnerships with, for example, the Economic Development Corporation in terms of business, see how that goes with some very specific parameters, and then either when, 2021, or it can be before. I mean, the council can always amend anything. We can take a step back and see, hey, is this working? Is this nimble enough? Is this flexible? Is this getting us? And that might be the direction that Mr. Fletcher is looking for, because I just don't really, I mean, maybe I'm a little tired today, but I just really don't think that we can sit here and just talk about, possibilities and things to think about. We're at a point where we need to signal what it is that we want to do. So am I reading these suggestions as a possible blueprint going forward that you have analyzed? Is that correct? Is that in terms of what you're laying out as a possible model?
I laid out a possible foundation to move forward, yes. I did not want to get ahead of the committee members in terms of their expectations for the designation.
Well, I'm a member of the committee, so I am asking you specifically for just one member. Could that be a blueprint?
Yes.
In terms of an approach, in terms of a direction that could be given to Mr. Fletcher in general, that would be the most advantageous, I guess is what I'm trying to look for, in response to many of the issues that we have laid out.
I believe so, yes.
Okay, thank you.
All right, so I think all committee members should make some comments now so that we can walk away from this meeting with a clear sense of the committee, that we want WorkSource Montgomery to proceed as assertively as possible. We want the organization to focus in the WIOA program services area, which of those, Gene, in your memo, which of those I'm not sure what the word you used,
Strategic groupings.
strategic groupings are most related to that function.
The council staff laid them out as all possible functions for the workforce development organization. The most critical one that I linked to was the entry points or job centers, since that's also related to the WIOA funding, which has the American Job Centers as part of the implementation for that. But certainly, again, the expectations is not that the workforce development organization would be providing barrier support or intensive services. As laid out in the memo, the intent there is that you need to make sure that those services are at the job centers where they're supposed to be if there's a particular need in that geographic area, or that there's seamless movement in the system. So the staff did not intend to split anything up here. This was just giving places, again, to focus expectations and efforts with the workforce development organization.
Well, again, what we want is for WorkSource Montgomery to get back to its mission. We want to focus the mission. We are also, there's a lot of interest in expanding programs that are necessarily partnered more with educational institutions, and potentially doing those directly with educational institutions. And, you know, I think that's the current framework. Mr. Rose, you look like you might want to make a comment. You'd be welcome to do that.
I'd love to. Ted Rose, I'm the current chair of WorkSource Montgomery. I think that that we're very close to taking some very positive steps forward. You know, as an organization, you know, we've done a lot this past year to begin the convening process. We had our first convening here this past month. Many of you were in attendance, so
great meeting. Got a lot out of it.
Appreciate you being there. We have the relationships with the top educational institutions. They're on our board. They're already part of that convening. We welcome the additional resources to spark additional programs, like with the tech program you've been talking about. We're very interested in that. We have made a lot of progress with the hire centers in getting our service offerings out into the community, and we're getting reach outs from the community wanting to have us train them in their community, in their communities to gain access to the services that we offer. And I think ultimately we're making very good progress. I think the organization has significant relationships with the business community that could certainly benefit with more active partnerships with the economic development organization. So I think that's all very positive. And ultimately, I think the one area where I think I would direct the council to focus would be on helping us to help the hardest to serve. And right now, those funds come in the form of TANF and SNAP funds, and those funds go through an HHS organization. That leadership has now turned over under the new administration, and we're looking to partner and work more closely with them to see how we can connect the dots on how the TANF funds are utilized for the benefit of for their benefit. Looking at how we can minimize the amount of time that individuals are in receipt of those transfer payments, and to get them into the workforce more closely. And I think one of the graphics that we could send to you that would be the most telling would be the number of individuals in receipt of TANF funds. How many of them have been in receipt of WIOA funds, and the graphic, which is unique to Montgomery County is that the answer is zero. And there are zero individuals that are in receipt of TANF funds that are also receiving services from WIOA.
Okay.
That's a stark contrast, and I think that by helping us partner with HHS, the council would do the county a great service in helping us do more for the most vulnerable.
Gene, can you please make a note of that issue, and I'd like you to investigate that a bit, and we'll return to that at a future time. Mr. Friedson.
Yeah, just quickly, I want to thank the board members for your service and for all the board members for their service, regardless of any decisions that are made by the county executive or here. I have been voluntold on county boards and commissions before, and I have been in challenging situations with the need to provide public services with public dollars and the challenge of being a nonprofit and a private organization and how that interfaces and the competing expectations that are provided and interests that are shared and being having many bosses with many stakeholders who have different expectations. I just wanted to thank you all and the staff as well for your work, particularly the board who are volunteering your time, your talent, and your energy. So I have kind of broad questions here. I raised these in the last time that we had talked about in a slightly different way. I appreciate the packet and all the work that Mr. Smith has put in, as Council President Navarro raised. But I wanted to hone in on one part of that because the packet made clear the three areas that our workforce development was supposed to focus on, that I also believe, if I'm not mistaken, you can correct me if I'm wrong, that are part of the mission and the on the website and what is done. The three areas are meets the talent attraction, development, and retention needs of strategic industries. That's number one. Number two is meets the needs of the underemployed and the unemployed. And number three is develops career pathways that lead to sustainable wage jobs to support a thriving economy. My understanding is that these goals, based on the packet, were identified in the county's workforce development system, the SkillSmart study in 2015, and that's how they, part of the process that led to the organization as it is to now. So I appreciate the additional discussion points on this, but I think before we get to that point, I think we ought to ask the question, are these the three goals that we still have? Are these the appropriate things that we ought to be focused on? Do we have adequate resources directed in the right places in order to accomplish these goals? Is the organization set up to accomplish these goals? And are we, what other parts of the system are required? We talked, I think the original conversation, which was, I think, 2 conversations ago, I think the council president was named as the continuum of workforce development, or the workforce development continuum, which to me sounded like a broader question of, that included the college, that included USG, that included the county executive. And I think, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but my sense from the way that conversation started, that was intentional. And to me, I think that ought to be the conversation that we have. Are the 3 strategic objectives still appropriate today? Do they make sense? Do they need to be updated? How are we following through on fulfilling those 3 strategic objectives? In what area are we falling short of those objectives? And then how do we either change them or change our focus to accomplish them? And are we set up currently to do that? And I think that, to me, is the conversation. It was raised, and then we went into another additional conversation, I think a valuable one in the packet, but to me, that's the crawling first before we walk and then run, of figuring out, is that still appropriate? Is that still relevant? Does that still make sense? I don't have strong feelings about this. I'm not a practitioner. I have only been on the council for a year. I wasn't here when this was established. I'm here to raise the question and to listen to the responses and to make a determination of what seems to be reasonable and appropriate. And I would just also raise as part of that the question of we have $139 million as part of this workforce development continuum. What are the decision points related to that funding? What funding is tied to what areas? Some of that's WIOA funding, some of that's community grants funding, some of that goes through the college. From my understanding, based on what we have, what's tied to what? How are we determining it? And then what decision points do we have from there? Up to this point, I've just not been totally clear on whether or not we've answered those basic overarching questions, which I think should be the main focus of what we're doing. Then I would also just raise at one point today I heard about the expanded priorities, and then another point today I heard the goal of focusing what WorkSource Montgomery does. I'm not saying one of those is right and one of those is wrong. I'm just saying it's very hard to do both of them at the same time. So I just wanted to raise those questions. I look forward to hearing answers and appreciate the fact that we're having the conversation.
Can I just follow up on your question?
Mr. Tawando's next.
I'm sorry. He mentioned me, so I just wanted to follow up on what he was saying. Just very quickly. What you were describing was very important, but that is the conversation that we had when we adopted the economic development platform and we had the discussion of the continuum. It was basically that we as a council have affirmed our commitment that we need to address the continuum, and how we get there is a question of do we want to maintain WorkSource Montgomery as is and make it responsible for that whole continuum, or can we be a little bit more innovative and say perhaps you should focus on these basic functions, and then let's look at another best practice, which might mean partnering with an educational, institution or with our economic development corporation, et cetera. So we kind of have already discussed that, and we have affirmed it. So I just wanted to say that, because it's not as if we're just starting from scratch in this conversation. We've had that conversation, and what we are here to do, and that was my understanding, was that Mr. Fletcher wanted a direction from the council as to where we should go. So I don't think we can leave this conversation without having done that. So I just wanted to remind ourselves of that.
Yeah. I'll turn to Will, and then I'll make my own comments.
Thank you. And I would agree, Council President, that the goals are the right goals. I think, it's the issue for me, and I think the issue we've had over this last year is, are we achieving those goals? Are we implementing those? Is the right leadership in place to do so? Is the plan in place to do so? So for me, it's not a question of are these the right strategic goals and objectives, which we reaffirmed this week in our resolution. The question is, like the last page of the packet here, you have 4 looking forwards. Leadership is key to success, not structure. I agree. There's many structures in many parts of the country. I've worked on WIOA and its predecessor. In some places, community colleges do the whole thing. In other places, we have different models. So I don't think that's the issue. The WSM search, CEO search, which we talked a little bit at the beginning, the current programs, and then the state requirements for WIOA. Those are the 4 things at the end, which I think are very important. For me, in making the determination, we passed this expedited bill to give us the flexibility to break up some of the functions, whether it be one entity focuses on underserved populations and the WIOA programming, and then maybe another entity focuses on some of the more innovative career pathway work, and they work together. But either way, wherever it is, I think the goals are the same. What I'm struggling with and would really like to see from the executive, and you're here as the representative today, Mr. Fletcher, for better or for worse, is some direction. We've had this same conversation privately about where we are, and I just, to hear that, to hear that we have 11 people, some of them are the same folks on the board, for example, and you admitted that, you're not where you want to be on that. And to not have a proactive vision for what you want to do and what the executive wants to see and the structure and format. We can certainly, we give you our feedback, and I appreciate, you all listening to that, but I think you need to drive the train a little more. And from my perspective, the reason we went down this path is because we weren't achieving our objectives. We had a long meeting with full council where when we brought up all these issues and we've seen packets. And so the question of whether we've been doing it and have improvements been made, I'm sure they have, and I take that, and I know people are working hard. But we are where we are, and I just think we need to have a clear commitment on where we're going. And for example, when I asked, my expectation today coming to this meeting was that the new board was going to be in place before we had the executive search. And I'm hearing today that it's the same board that's going to make the pick. And to me, that's not signaling a good start on where we need to go. And so, and then when I ask, are they going to be brought and socialized with this committee? I'm told, well, maybe. I'm not sure. So it's hard for me to even get the information I need to make the decision as a committee of where we need to go. So do you want to comment on any of that?
Yes, a lot of that. So the direction, we have decided that, we were going with the structure that was in place, and that is the direction we were going. The direction that we were going is to...
That's the county executive's position.
Correct, because that's what we know as of today. And in the meetings that we had, the decision was to keep going in that direction, especially until we're told something differently. Now, the change to me is not assigning the board members. That's part of the process. We have to do that, and we are doing that. But to me, what we were looking for from council was, and what I have stated to, I believe, Worksource and anyone who will listen, that in addition to these 3 goals in here, that and you as a collective group has said to us that we want you to add to that. So when I say expanded priority, which I was corrected by the chair, when I said that it was a new priority, it's not a new priority, but it is one that they are focusing on now more heavily, which is the convening aspect as well as serving, addressing the most vulnerable. Those are in addition to the 3 that are listed on this page. And if I'm wrong, then please stop me now, because that's what I've been telling is the direction that this council, which the county executive agrees with, should be like a 5 priority or 5 goal now, as opposed to the 3 goals that are mentioned in the packet.
So what are those 2 additional goals?
To serve as the convener of the workforce development ecosystem for the county,
Yeah.
as well as to address the needs of the most vulnerable, so that you are not just taking those who are job ready and placing them.
That's already a goal. It's serve underserved or unemployed, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Well, the most vulnerable is a kind of a layer deeper than
Okay.
that.
So
and that's our
expanding on that.
Yes, exactly. And it takes a different level of effort, which one of you asked him the question of, was he able to do what you wanted done with the resources that he has? And I don't know that we know that serving the most vulnerable can be done with the exact same model that we have. That would be a question for them, but I think it's an important question. But I think that it's something that, correct me if I'm wrong, Worksource, but they have accepted that as part of what they're going to be building on for the very near future.
Right. And I understand that. And I think we do agree. I would see that those other 2 things are subsets of the goals that were already set. I think when Worksource understood its role to be a convener from the very beginning, that was part of the discussion from the very, very beginning. And so now the question of, did that work out well? Was the trust engendered with other partners? Were they able to effectively function in that role? That's a totally separate question, right? And the reasons, so that's, I think, part of why we're here today. Mm-hmm. So my point is, I think, again, the goals are the right goals. Let's just get some very clear understanding about how we're moving forward. Okay, I find out today that there's an executive committee. They're going to bring together the finalists. The full board will vote. That was new information. I'm glad to hear that. I've expressed many times, I think that should be socialized here. Mm-hmm. And so I think what I would like to propose, so we can just have something concrete, is that we move forward with that. I would agree that it would be preferable to be on the same page, move forward under the current structure,
right,
and then maybe in a year check back in, or around budget time, in assuming that things are moving the way they should be. But I just think we need some concrete and you guys get the board members over to us from your side of the
Right.
street. WorkSource is going to do what it's going to do on its board.
Right.
But I think we need to know that is a plan. We need to have a plan going forward.
That is the plan. I will say that. But when you say check in a year, I do not want us to wait a year to come back in front of this committee so that we can.
Budget time's less than a year. That's 6 months.
Right. I'm like, we have got to have regular meetings in some shape, form, or fashion with this committee to give you information, to give you updates.
I don't mean don't have updates. I mean like a point in time where we reevaluate whether this relationship is working.
And I thought he said the reevaluation point would come at June 21.
That's too long.
Well,
That's just the drop dead date. What I would
Yeah,
recommend
that's
in this
a,
instance, let's just we'll have a check-in at some future day where we're having regular reports coming into us, and then we can look at those.
So my proposal was that we move forward as is in collaboration, understanding that we have this general set of goals, and that by the time we are considering the 2021 budget, that we will reevaluate whether the relationship is working. By then, we should presumably have the board fully up and running. We should have a new CEO, and I think we'll have enough information to know where the direction is going, or whether this is we need to continue or make preparations to make a change. And so I'm proposing that is what we would do.
okay.
Good. I mean, that was my objective here today, was to establish that WorkSource Montgomery is not going to be shuttered, that the organization is going to continue, that the executive branch and the council will work together with WorkSource Montgomery for the organization's continued progress. And unfortunately, that has been a question that is has not been clarified.
Correct.
Until now. So I think in a sense, that's what we needed to accomplish today, to enable the executive branch. Jerome has the task of implementing all of this and needs to know that this is the mandate.
Correct.
To build and grow and improve WorkSource Montgomery. So your resolution or your point is quite applicable to that. I think that Andrew has raised bigger questions. How do these objectives work? When we began this conversation, there was a year ago, when the county executive took office, there was a lot of criticism that the organization was not doing enough to help the WIOA population. That's how I think of it. And so we want the organization to strengthen its efforts in those areas. But that led to questions about whether we were going to decertify WorkSource Montgomery and replace it entirely with another organization. It's very difficult for an organization to continue making progress when its very existence is unclear.
True.
And so I think what we want to just do today is say we're going to continue with WorkSource Montgomery. We will have to grapple with, we'll have to see how it is going with the board, with the programs. And in general, all of the initiatives that are potentially outside of the WIOA program, Tech Talent Pipeline initiatives, we all have an open mind about how those can be built.
Right.
And we'll tackle them.
Correct.
Sequentially.
What?
Yeah.
What?
Oh, that's right. Council President doesn't have a light
I'm sorry.
due to her seat. So
Can
why
I
don't
say
I
something
pause
just
there, and I'll pause there, and I'll go to.
Can I just say something based on what
Sure,
you just said?
sure.
As we move forward with this, what I'm looking at as a clean slate, when we do judge and the updates that we want to come back and make sure that at some point in time in the near future, we're all satisfied with where we're going. Let's make sure that we look at the data that is provided and the efforts that are given, to justify whether or not we're there or not, and maybe not any perception of isolated situations, but truly, look at the numbers and what we're doing and what we're not doing. And then when we give that to you, you will provide, as you always do, your feedback as to why is this number low, or why is this number out of whack, so that we can make sure that we actually hit the areas that we all want to address.
That sounds fine. And the numbers are a part of it. The WIOA numbers are a part of it. But it's also, when we haven't had this with full session, Councilmember Albernos, who's not here, has mentioned this. You have to have the trust of the rest of the system. We mentioned
True.
it's 138 million.
I agree.
Okay, and if you don't have that, the people that are working and that is shaky.
Oh, it is.
So that has to be evaluated in the context of the ability. It's not just the job centers are a key part, and I went in on that months ago. And I hope that we are seeing that improvement over time. But it's also, if we're going to have them convening and leveraging and working with Montgomery College and the other people and the nonprofits that are providing services, that's a critical component, which is, again, directly tied into the leadership of the board and the CEO. So that's why they're all kind of connected questions, but certainly want to make a decision based on that holistic picture.
Absolutely. And the convening will be the part of the process that gives that foundation for the stakeholders and the partners to have that level of trust.
Okay, so I just want to clarify what is this proposal that you're talking about, Councilman Jawanda, because I know I described what I wanted to see. And so that's why I want to clarify. So what we're saying is, I think we're in agreement that we are not going to blow up Worksource Montgomery. We believe that there is a lot of value in continuing with the structure of the organization. We recognize that we have leadership changes, but we also, I think, had expressed in the past an acknowledgement that maybe it was just like too much, too many expectations, right? Which is why we said, well, maybe we need to start thinking outside the box in terms of some, different components, perhaps that partnership with an educational institution, and perhaps some other partnerships with EDC, et cetera. So what I want to understand is, what are we saying? That we're saying that, okay, we're going to continue on primarily focusing on the WIOA kind of work and then exploring these partnerships with other educational institutions, et cetera, and then coming back in a year to see how, is that what we're saying? I'm just trying to clarify. Or are we saying, no, you still have to do all of the above, and then we're going to come back in a year and check?
No, I think that's correct. Again, as the convener, your job is not necessarily to run the programs, but to work with others to implement and do those. So,
because there may be some funding mechanism when we introduced that bill that identified possible partnerships with educational institutions. I mean, it wasn't just, hey, educational institution, go out and do this. It was perhaps there's some funding that might go along with that. So I just want to clarify that because, I don't think it's enough for us to just say we can just go ahead and partner with a lot of different other organizations and institutions and expect them to now carry all of this water without any kind of funding mechanism. So anyway, I just want to clarify that because if what we're saying is continue on Worksession Montgomery with some of these, basic foundational programs like WIOA, et cetera, I'm good with that. But I do believe that the mistake we made at the very beginning was to put too much on the table. So we need to figure out a mechanism to explore how we would establish these partnerships with, for example, I don't know, Montgomery College, USU, whatever it is, but that's going to have to bring some money. And where is that money coming from? Is it from the existing funding that we're providing Worksource Montgomery? Is it new money that we're going to identify? I just don't want to leave it all amorphous because it's also not fair for Worksource Montgomery to have to figure that out, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point. My understanding is that Worksource Montgomery's funding is almost entirely WIOA, and that money is not available for doing any work other than WIOA. Is that correct, Gene?
I'll defer to the Worksource Montgomery in terms of specific numbers, but my recollection is roughly 60% of their funding is related to the federal mandated WIOA programs, which is for specific training for unemployed or recently unemployed. They get $1.8 million from the county roughly. That includes Pepco Exelon merger money that goes away in fiscal 21, and they have a few grants. So, yes.
Okay.
Right.
All right.
So,
I guess in response to Council President's request, since there's a desire to maybe consider other partnerships and furthering that, Council staff, I think, we should spend time with those partnerships and working with committee members individually to kind of like build some coalition around that and to actually come back to the committees with an understanding and actual conversation. Something that we couldn't prepare today because we were at a high level.
Yeah, so just to
Just to get clear, like, is that
agree.
what you want me to do?
Yes.
I think that would be great, and I'm sorry, I forgot one last thing. I hope that as there's this process of selecting a new executive director, the special attention is paid to somebody that has experience in a lot of these spaces that we have been discussing regarding this continuum, so that, so that way, even though it's not as if we're saying, hey, Worksource Montgomery, you're going to have to be responsible for all of this, but having somebody that has that kind of background, I think it's going to be really useful as we're moving forward with a lot of real ambitious goals. That would be really great.
Terrific. Andrew. Mr. Katz.
So I'm not exactly sure what we're voting on right now. I have to be entirely
We're establishing a sense
clear.
of the committee.
Okay. I'm still trying to understand what the sense is, to be honest. So
That Worksource Montgomery will continue, and the executive branch will continue forward to replace the board, hire a CEO, build programs, work with the organization to improve its operation.
Okay, so I appreciate that. It still feels a little vague to me. A couple things. One is, I heard both sides. Again, we talked about expanding what Workforce Montgomery is doing, and focusing what Workforce Montgomery is doing. Those are two competing, divergent priorities. Number two, I heard the county executive would like direction from the council of where the will of the joint committee would like to go. And the joint committee, members of the joint committee, made pretty clear that they would like to hear from the county executive direction for where the county executive would like to go. So to me, I'm listening here. It feels like we're running a little bit in a circle. I also want to raise the fact that while I appreciate where folks are coming from on the 6 months, let's address this during budget and figure out where we want to go, I am concerned, in addition to the issue that I share raised by Councilmember Jawando about a process of hiring a CEO where you have massive turnover of the leadership of the board, who, by the way, are the boss of the CEO, and you're basically recruiting for a candidate for a critically important position in the county, not just for county government, but for residents, for our economy, for our education system, for everything that this entails. And you're saying two things. One, we haven't really decided what you're going to do, what you're going to be empowered and allowed to do in this role, what the organization is going to be expected to do in this role. We don't know exactly who your boss is, your 23 to 34 bosses, which, I mean, that's not a great, not an easy situation for anybody to operate under, much less not knowing who those 23 to 34 people are going to be. And by the way, in 6 months after you take the job or less, everything could change and the organization could no longer exist. I'm concerned of the candidates that when we get to the serious moments of this, I mean, I'm sure a lot of people have expressed interest who are very talented. I've heard from people through the grapevine of individuals who might be interested, but I am concerned that once we get down to the question of does that candidate leave a position based on these uncertainties, I'm concerned about where that would leave us. I also am concerned that I think we're having a question of who is the horse to ride in workforce development in these different areas without, I think, concluding of what the destination is of where we're supposed to be going in workforce development. And I don't know, to me, I think we're putting the cart before the horse to a certain extent. I think we have to figure out what are our goals and how are we accomplishing them? Are we falling short of those goals or not? The only two things that I have heard that are drastic changes of the expansion of responsibilities, and mind you, I don't have as much experience in this area as some others of my colleagues do, and I don't want to pretend like I do, but I heard convening, and that was part of the original report of why the organization was created in the first place. Mm-hmm. There could be a disagreement of what that means or a disappointment in what is occurring, but I don't think that's a new function. I think that's an existing function, and I think Councilmember Jawando said something similar to that. And I don't honestly know what serving the most vulnerable means in the context of workforce development. I think it's an important and laudable goal, but beyond meeting the needs of the underemployed and the unemployed, I don't think it's particularly clear, as well-intended as it is and as important as it might be as a priority area. I'm not sure in the context of this exactly what that means and how that is different from what our prior expectations were and what the existing programs are. I'm sure there are differences. I'm sure lots of people have very strong views on that who have worked much closer to this than I have, but I can't imagine it's that clear to the public because it's not clear at all to me. And I've been in every meeting, I've sat through every question, I've read every packet, and I honestly don't know. And so I think we need to work that out. And so I would just reiterate the point that we really need to figure out what we want to do and then figure out how is best to go there. I'm not saying that I necessarily disagree with the view of let's take a look at where we're headed, but I am very concerned about a CEO hiring process in the midst of all of this uncertainty of not having a board set up. I'm very concerned about the fact that it seems like both sides of the street are pointing at the other and waiting for the other to provide direction, and that concerns me. The county executive has a lot of authority when it comes to this organization and appointing the leadership, and at a certain point, one side of the street's going to have to exert itself and figure out who's in charge. But all I heard today was both sides saying, I want direction from you, and
No, I
you
never
want
said
direction
that,
from
actually.
us.
I did not say that. I'm trying to say the opposite of that.
Councilmember Giwando said, I'd like to get direction from the county executive.
Well, I wish the county executive had some direction.
The assistant CAO
yeah.
said, I'm here. I thought I was here. You can read back the tape if you'd like. I'm pretty sure I remember it. I'd like to get direction from what the will of the council is and where the council would like to go with this. That's what the intention is of the administration.
Then we gave that direction.
Okay, all right. Hold on a sec.
I'm pointing out that there are a lot of uncertainties left.
You're right, okay, and you're not but here's the situation. County executive took office.
Yes.
He decided he was very unsatisfied with WorkSource Montgomery. Several council members said they were very unsatisfied with WorkSource Montgomery. The organization encountered a crisis, and things ground to a halt from my perspective. And we waited and waited and waited for that to be resolved, and it was not resolved. We had legislation before the council that said we might decertify WorkSource Montgomery and identify a different organization to work through. And whether we would fund the organization in the budget was an open question. So we have got to, decide whether that is still the status of the organization. I think council members have said today, we're satisfied with knowing that there is a change in leadership. We will continue forward with WorkSource Montgomery. I think that is a lot to accomplish today. I think that I think there will be ongoing questions about the scope of the mission, and we're going to have to keep working on this. But today's objective is to establish we're going to proceed. And please take this back to the county executive. I think let him know the county council very firmly wants to continue with WorkSource Montgomery, and we look forward to an update. We'll get back together in February, and we'll talk about what we're doing next. I share concerns that I've heard conflicting messages about what the executive's view is, and I'm trying to just sort of roll through that now and say, let's just proceed. But I would really appreciate, Jerome, maybe you'll take some time and kind of give us some very high level, a high level framework from the executive branch so we understand your perspective. But I think that we're saying, here's our perspective. And I know that you would like to proceed with WorkSource Montgomery as well. Mm-hmm. And so that's what we're doing. That's what we're doing.
I just want to make one very clear point. I agree with Chairman Reamer. We're moving forward. I shared my concerns about the CEO search and the process. It's not ideal that we're juggling that in the middle of board transition and everything that's happening, but we are where we are, so we have to move forward there. I think it lessens the negative aspects of that situation if we're all communicating in that process, which is why at the beginning, an hour and a half ago, I said the joint committee should be involved to the extent, obviously we're not making the decision, but giving feedback on said finalists. I think that's important. And to the council president's point, not that we're saying in 6 months we're going to blow the whole system up and move away. I think what we can do, and this will be in concert with the new board and the new CEO or ED ideally, is there do you want to share some of this? Is it too much? Do you want to just focus on this? Do we want to take up this TANF issue? You really drill down on that. And the Montgomery College and or other partners in USG can focus on tech talent pipeline and career pathways and do other things. And we're still a team. You're still coordinating the whole system. But other people are taking different responsibilities, and our funding and our budgeting process reflects that.
Correct.
So I think that's a conversation we would need to have with the new leadership. So we have to get them on board, and not that it would be imposed upon them, but be a discussion with them to see whether we need to do that. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. And is that a fair characterization of your view, Council President? Yes. Okay. Quick nod. It was the quickest answer we had today. And does that make sense to you, Mr. Fletcher?
Yes, it does, especially the splitting off of the partnerships with another entity. I do believe that WorkSource partners with educational institutions currently under certain programs that fall under their guidelines. This additional partnership is something that I think needs to be fleshed out.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. So I think we are sending a clear message to Chair Reamer's point. We want to move forward in good faith with the current structure, but evaluate as we go along and potentially evaluate other partnerships that could have funding and going along with it.
Yes.
Okay, now, last item before we go. Maybe Director Talley could join us for a moment if I'm not catching her by surprise to do that, but can we just have an update?
Yes, and while she comes up to give you the update, I will just say I will continue to partner and work with you and meet with you to make sure I provide clarity for items, if anything that's not clear today.
Well, I think we have some work to do, right?
Yes.
To get to agreement on some of these other issues. I mean, I think Andrew's not wrong about, continuing confusions. We have some work to do. So it's not just that you have to meet with us to share, to clarify for us. We've got to do some dialogue together over a period of time to get to agreement. But yes, I encourage you to do that.
My goal in the council after 11 months is not to be right, but it's to be not wrong. So I feel like we've all accomplished something here today, at least.
All right.
There you go.
All right. That's good.
Yes.
Hi, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
So where our status lays right now, and I asked Mr. Fletcher to tell us where we are with the signed contract. We have not moved forward with the hiring of the 3.5 positions. One position is tentatively hired, as far as the information I received this morning, for the 2 part-time community outreach positions. When a person leaves the detention services, the warm handoff to the community centers to be able to help those individuals seek employment. So I'm encouraged by the fact that we do have one person who will be split that is identified for the Wheaton and Germantown location. We still need to be able to put in place our 0.5 administrative aid position. And in doing this process, we actually lost one full-time program manager position, which we are seeking to fill. I received some information today
do you mean the person retired or that you lost an FTE?
She resigned.
Okay, she resigned.
Right,
okay.
she moved on. And so we need to be able to fill that position. It's been 38 days. And so you have one person who is effectively doing the job of another full-time person and a 0.5 administrative aid position, which makes it hard to be able to deliver services. So we are not where we need to be. We need to be hopeful that we can get there. And if Jerome has any recent dates, I'll be encouraged by that, and so that maybe it's around the corner.
All right.
I can be encouraging and tell you this around the corner, as the job descriptions should be posted, I believe, by tomorrow, as I am led to believe. What I would say is I agree with,
Sorry, can you just keep it real simple here? That who has to post the job descriptions? Director Talia mentioned a contract. Who is that with? Just
so
back to basics.
the contractor we contract with WorkSource Montgomery. They contract with another contractor who is the one, I think, handling the process of hiring the positions that are still vacant. I
Okay.
believe that's Grant and Associates. And that organization is still working to fill those vacant roles. As she said, they are still vacant. What I would say is, again, that is partly on the county, and we are not happy as well as that her positions have not been filled. So that is, again, part of what
Is
we
the
have done.
contract signed?
The contract, the contract is signed by externally. It has to go through an internal routing process through legal and other
So it's
people.
an internal county
Yes.
process
Yes.
delay.
But both parties have signed it.
Correct.
No.
It just hasn't been approved upon as far as like legal and other departments that have to sign the contract.
So it's not signed.
It's not signed by the
Okay,
county.
It's not,
It's
not
under-
signed.
It's not
approved.
final, right,
Yeah.
exactly.
Okay, so it's our side that hasn't
And,
signed.
and that is the
Our
contract
side.
between the county and
WorkSource.
WorkSource.
Correct.
And is that contract has to be signed before funding can come over? Or what is that contract? Why is that the barrier to?
Well, the contract outlines the services that need to be
Yeah.
provided.
Right.
You guys put the money over in our pot as opposed to where it was traditionally, which was over in WorkSource Montgomery's contracting funding amount. So we had to handle it that way.
That was, and just for my Councilmember Reamer's benefit, the issue, the reason we made that decision and the issue was because of the structure of what was happening and not being able to have it be a job center and the trouble with the
Correct.
warm handoff. There were issues in the implementation, which is why the contract became an issue. Those issues have since been resolved to the satisfaction of Director Tyler?
Are you referring to the issue with the American Job Center name?
Yes.
We are still moving forward with that title. That is in Amendment, I believe, 6 of the contract. I believe there's still some differences of opinion on whether we can still move forward with that, but we do have an assigned amendment that once you have a contract that has been executed, the original one, you move forward with the previous amendments.
So based on your, I'm
So,
sorry.
But my
Yes.
understanding is that we're unsatisfied with how WorkSource was implementing the program. So we said, no, let's take it back and give it back to the county. And then the county was to execute a contract directly. And when we did that, what we may not have anticipated was that it takes forever for the county
A significant
to
time
do
frame.
anything because of our endless process requirements. And essentially, that is the current, that's how it's been represented to me.
That
That
is
is the current
accurate.
status of things.
That
So
is
we, our good intentions have gone awry, essentially, and we're no better off than we were despite trying to make a change. But
We're hopeful.
we're hopeful,
Yes.
there's light at the end of the tunnel, because the contract should be signed shortly, and the job descriptions will be posted imminently.
I'm told each week that the contract is near to being signed.
By the county attorney's office?
I can't say that it's the county attorney's office is the holdup. I will say that it has just gone through a very long internal process, and this is, again, my apologies for the entire county's office for this contract. It has taken far too long.
All right, well, would you please use the wrath of the council to get that through?
Gladly.
All right? Yeah.
Director Talley, since we have you, so one person is currently providing job and career services inside the jail,
Correct.
and so no one outside at this point?
No.
Okay. And that's why you need to hire
Yes,
this other
immediately.
full-time person immediately?
Immediately. It is unfair for one person to take on and to shoulder that type of responsibility. When we had the 2 full-time positions and they weren't vacant, they were still conducting other responsibility administrative tasks that would take them away from fully being able to engage in the case management and job readiness training and services that they were providing for the population. So it was, we were expecting maybe around late fall that the positions would be in place in order to be able to provide some support and be able to pull people back to their designations and their specialties of service without being able to do those administrative tasks.
And is
So the person who's identified in the community is, once that contract is executed and signed, we'll be able to bring that person on. They'll be able
you'll
to
be able
start.
to then advertise it, because that
Well,
position hasn't.
There's one that is filled, that is going to be the community warm handoff.
Yeah.
The two part-time position, as I'm told, is one full-time person was hired to be able to do those two part-time, which is fine. But we need to be able to have that contract executed in order for the person to actually be able to begin and start providing services to our population inside.
And you all have contracted with WorkSource. They're the ones hiring through Grant Associates.
Yes.
These people.
Yes.
And for, I guess this is a WorkSource question. Maybe Jerome, if you can't answer it, they can. How long is that contract with Grant for these services at the jail? Or is that part of the overall contract with WIOA? It's the part of the overall contract. Go ahead.
I think it would be tied to the contract that we're trying to get done, but I mean, I could be wrong. I was.
Could someone from WorkSource answer that question?
In the next fiscal year? Next fiscal year?
Okay. All right. Because I had heard that was a concern for some of the employees that have been working for Grant, just how they have been interacting with them at the jail. That's my understanding with one of the people who resigned.
Well, now, that contract is tied to this discussion regarding, the continuation of WorkSource in this process. So, in addition to those people in the jails who are concerned, there are still valuable employees at WorkSource Montgomery doing valuable work each day that are concerned as well. So I think that this meeting today should provide some sense of relief. And I know the chairman said earlier that he felt like, things had come to a screeching halt. I can tell you for a fact that they did keep going and performing.
I know that they continued to try to work through the confusion.
Yes, they did.
All right. Thank you.
Yep.
Please. We got to get this one done.
Yes. Every day.
All right. So if any of you would like to come back and sit through the public hearing tonight on 5G wireless zoning, we'd welcome you back. Otherwise, we'll see you at our next opportunity. Thank you very much.
Thank you all.
All right.
Old 100 Road, Maryland 109. Travel is slow on I-495 in the following directions. Outer loop from River Road, Maryland 190 to the American Legion Bridge. Inner loop from Old Georgetown Road, Maryland 187 to Georgia Avenue, Maryland 97.
For current and ride-on bus schedule information, please call the Transit Information Center at 240-777-7433.
We will continue to monitor transportation conditions throughout the day. When those conditions change, this station